Good morning, everyone. Yeah, that was totally me. It was Grant in the back. No, it was me. I'm sorry. Off on, it's so hard. Good morning, everyone. How are we? All right, great. Hey, we're getting out of Egypt. If you have a Bible, you can open it to Exodus chapter 13. We're going to start in verses 17 through 22, and that's where we're going to land the whole time. Okay, Exodus chapter 13, Genesis, Exodus, go 13, 17, you're there, okay? It'll also be on the screen, so we have you covered. You cannot escape the word. Verse 17. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near, for God said, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. But God led the people around by the way of the wilderness toward the Red Sea. And the people of Israel went up out of the land of Egypt equipped for battle. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for Joseph had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones with you from here. And they moved on from Succoth and encamped at Etham on the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, that they may travel by day and by night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart before the people. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. One question I want to start with this morning is one I've thought about many times over the years is why the Exodus story keeps going. Why not just end at Passover night? Why not just end with, and they went out. God freed them, God liberated them, and happily ever after. What a great event. Amazing. That would be the plagues, it's all set up. What is with the granular details of the journey out of Egypt? Not quite as exciting as the deliverance from Egypt. Well, deliverance is one thing. Discipleship's another thing, right? God says to Moses, to tell Pharaoh, he says, let my people go. Why? That they may serve me. It's connected. Not just let my people go, and I hope it goes well for them, wandering everywhere. Great, love you guys. Call me. No, let my people go so that they may serve me. Now, that's a different thing. That requires something else than just walking out of Egypt. It requires Egypt coming out of us. Having a wedding is one thing. Building a marriage is another. Making a baby is one thing. Raising a child is a whole other thing. There's moments, and then there's the work. There's being freed, and there's actually figuring out how do we be free? Well, that's much harder. There's 430 years of slavery and bondage, meaning there's a lot for God to prune and to cut. 430 years of slavery, of just normalizing this is our life. Good news this morning for the people of Israel, for you, for me. God is not only committed, though, to our salvation, He's committed to our transformation. He who began a good work in you will complete it. He will not abandon you as orphans. He will come to you. What God starts, He will finish. The passage this morning is one of my favorites. It's one of my favorites. Greg talked last week about his Greg road to Romans. My road is always to Exodus and Genesis. It just is start at the beginning, start at the very beginning. There's just so much here. And what I want to point out this morning is three things about God that we see as He walks the people out of Egypt, and He walks Egypt out of the people. And by people, I also mean us. Number one, his pruning, ... the wilderness. Number two, his promise, ... the bones. And number three, it starts with a P, you're so welcome, his presence. I worked on that for you, for all three of you that care, and even going to remember this after lunch today. His presence, ... the fire. His promise, his pruning, his promise, and his presence. Number one, his pruning. We'll read it again. Verses 17 and 18. When Pharaoh let the people go, so there's the event, there's the Passover, he lets people go, he's had enough, too much carnage, too many frogs, too many flies. God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near, key detail there. For God said, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. But God led the people around by way of the wilderness toward the Red Sea. And the people of Israel went up from the land of Egypt equipped for battle. Now, Egypt for the Israelites and for us was a place of slavery. It's a place of bondage. It's a place that traps us. But it can often masquerade as a promised land. It can masquerade as, well, this is just my life. This is normal. These are things this is how I cope. This is how I live. This is how I experience pleasure. We wouldn't say that's my Egypt. This is actually just all that I know. And yet often it is, right? And sin is multiple forms of slavery in our life and deception in our life. We're slaves to image and to appearance. We'd be slaves to control, maybe just a few of us. Slaves to substances, or to shopping, or to sports, or to sex, or to approval, or to power. Slaves to money. Slaves to our past. A lot of Egypt in us. We're all ensnared by kind of the fangs of Egypt, and we bow down to pharaohs who ask for our allegiance. Give to me. Come do this again. Say this again. Experience this again. This time you'll be free. Did God really say? As the Apostle Paul would say, we all still wrestle with the old self, the flesh, the patterns, the behaviors. They don't all just go away overnight. God's redeeming them and restoring them. We're a new creation, but we're also working out our salvation with fear and trembling over time, becoming the people God has already made us by the Spirit. There is you know it's true in me, I know it's true in you. There's a lot to prune, is there not? There is much to prune. And that's why God leads them a different way. Not the way of the Philistines, even though that way is closer. There's a way to get to the promised land geographically that is more of a straight line, and God's like, we're not going that way because it's a dangerous way. It's a treacherous way. Even though it's a shorter distance, you are not prepared for it. You can't handle it. Your hearts, your souls, your bodies, your psychological, you're not ready because when you see the danger, when you see the fear, what are you going to want to do? You want to go back. You want to go back because you're not ready for your freedom yet. You're not ready. So I'm not going to lead you that way. I'm actually going to take you the long way, right? If you're typing this into the GPS, when you do this sometimes and you know the way to go, but the GPS wants to take you another way, this is how fleshly I can be. Sometimes I just want to make the GPS mad, and I'm going to drive even more this way. And the blue lines are like, back. And I'm like, no, I'm going to keep, even though I'm now lost, I'm going to keep going just to prove a point to this technological object on my phone. I'm going to keep going. The GPS in the situation will be going, no. It's right there. It's actually right there, and then they're just going by, and God's like, yeah, you're not ready because your heart and your soul is not able to live in full freedom yet, and I don't want you to have to go back. I don't want you to have to go back. All right, what does the wilderness represent for them and for us? Well, it represents uncertainty, which we all love. It represents a stripping of the self. You get exposed. The masks come off. It's like, oh, this is who I really am. I'd rather go back to Egypt. I built up a pretty good identity there. Not great, but I didn't have to deal with actually me. It represents loss. And as every loss represents, it represents then grief of what was, the life we had, the people we had, the relationships that we had. It represents emptying and purifying. Here's the thing, the unknown is actually really scary. And that's why so many times in our lives, so many times in my life, I just want to go back to what I've always known. Give me the creature comforts. Give me that. Right, soon the Israelites, what are they going to say? Greg talked about it last week. He said, soon in a few chapters, they're going to say to Moses, did you bring us out here to let us die, Moses? Or at least we had food in Egypt. We had great soup in Egypt, and it's easy for us to sneer at that and be like, they were slaves, they were in bondage, and now they're free, they're going towards the promised land. And we're like, how could you possibly? And yet all of us do that. All of us do that. All of us gets moments like, God, you led me to this place to kill me, to wound me, to harm me. I was okay, even if deep down we're like, we weren't okay at all. We weren't okay at all. We begin to lie to the enemy begins to lie to ourselves. You had it better there. God doesn't have what's best for you. Just lie after lie after lie. And we're like, we look to God and we're like, this is really it? The wilderness is really the place of formation, the place of breaking for me. I don't want to go. I don't want to go here. I don't want to do this. And that's what I love. One of the reasons you know the Bible is true is because you wouldn't put things in like this if it didn't actually happen. The whole thing would just be, we believe, absolutely, can't wait, no doubt in our minds. Instead, 6 days in, they're like, the soup was great. Why? Because it's really hard when you don't know where you're going and you don't know what God's doing. It's easy to preach about it, and it's great and wonderful to look back when you see all that God has done. It's hard in the moment, like when you're flying in the clouds, and you're like, I hope we know where we're going. What slavery does is it normalizes sin, and it conditions us to return to the old ways again and again and again. That's the power of sin. Is not just us missing the mark. It's a power that is broken through the gospel and through the power of Jesus, and yet it still tries to just pull us back in, doesn't it? In The Shawshank Redemption, if you've seen this film, it's so good. Brooks is an older man in the time of the movie, is being set. He'd been in prison for a crime he committed for 50 years. And he tries, actually, his parole comes up, and he tries to hurt somebody in prison. He's an old man, he can't really do it, but he tries to hurt somebody in prison because he doesn't want to leave prison. Eventually, he's a sweet old man, he leaves prison, he gets to go. And it follows him in a powerful way, and he can't handle his freedom. He bags groceries, and he misses prison, and he eventually, tragically, he ends his life. And after that scene, Morgan Freeman, who plays Red, is talking with some of the other guys, and they hear about what happened. They're like, he was free. How could he? And this is what Red, Morgan Freeman, the man. I'm not going to do it in his voice because he is God himself, so I will not say that. These walls are funny. First, you hate them. Then you get used to them. Enough time passes, so you depend on them. That's institutionalized. And God to the people of Israel is basically saying, you've been institutionalized. Now, in the example here, Brooks's crime put him in prison. But prison also did a number on him, which is why 2/3 of all people who leave prison go back to prison. I just want to go back. I don't know how to live this way. But God is like, you've been depending on something here. I need you to depend on me. And this is scarier, and this is harder, but this is the way. The wilderness is the way. In a sense, God's basically like, I've got to get you lost to get you found. Tim Keller says this, over and over again, God meets us in the wilderness. He meets us in the desert. When we think our life is on a detour, it's really spiritual Main Street. When we think everything's going wrong, it's going wrong because it forces us to think in ways we wouldn't have thought otherwise. It forces us to seek in ways we wouldn't have thought otherwise. When things aren't going according to your plan, when you think you're on a back road, it's Main Street. spirituality. The wilderness is not just to get to the promised land. The wilderness is actually where it happens. It's not just the road, eyes down, move forward. Where is, the milk? Where's the honey? It's the furnace where God forges us. It's actually where all the stuff happens, because we know what happens when they get to the promised land. They forget. They forget. God's like, you're going to forget. Actually, this season, this moment in your life, my presence is going to be there for you. Psalm 78, 18 and 19. Speaking of the people of Israel around this time period, they tested God in their heart by demanding the food they craved. They spoke against God, saying, can God spread a table in the wilderness? Well, absolutely. And some of you, many of you know that there are tables you can eat at in the wilderness you can't eat anywhere else. Am I right? There are tables in the wilderness where you can experience God in ways you can't in other places. That's going to annoy me. I know some of you too were like, just move it. I sense it. Here's in the places of greatest brokenness, those places generally over time, not immediately, over time, those will lead to the places of greatest becoming, which is why the wilderness is the way. And it's actually because God loves us. That's why he takes us the long route. He's pruning stuff out of us that we're not even aware of. John 15, 1 through 2. Jesus says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. Pruning hurts. Pruning is violent. Pruning is painful. But it has a point. It's to bear fruit. It's to be a certain type of people, a certain type of person. The wilderness, it is the way where we're pruned. And God brings us back to it again. Even though we wish he wouldn't and we want to go back, God in his grace, he brings us back to it because he loves us. And it doesn't mean it's not hard. So in the wilderness, in the pruning, we see two truths in this little passage here, amazing passage, that we can draw strength from. God's promise and God's presence. The first one, his promise, the bones. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for Joseph had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones with you from here. Now, what is this about? What an odd little verse. Of all the things to bring with you when you're leaving the house, what's it called? Phone, wallet, keys. They're like bones of Joseph. Get the bones out here. What's it about? Well, we have to go back to Genesis 50, as always. Every road leads to Genesis. It leads to Genesis. It does, I promise you. The final words that Joseph says, talk about a man who was pruned. Talk about a man who went through the furnace. This man did. The last thing he says is this promise to his sons, which clearly lives on in the memory of the people of Israel. I have this slide for you. And Joseph said to his brothers, I'm about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land, which this is what Moses is quoting here, to the land that he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So Exodus 13:19 is quoting Genesis 50 here. And then of all the things in the Hall of Fame of Faith, whatever you want to call Hebrews 11, that the writer could note Joseph's faith for, this is what he picks out. By faith, Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave directions concerning his bones. Joseph did a lot. I mean, the dude did a lot. And if I'm him, I'm like, that was a moment, but there was that. Some of the other guys got better stuff than that. I got the promise on my deathbed. Right, you never know what God values. You never know what part of your journey God says, that actually was the part. That you thought it was over here. You thought that was your moment. You thought that when you were shining, it actually was over here. You have no idea. One day you will. One day you'll see. Amazing. This absolute faith. I mean, when Joseph makes this promise, actually, it's hard to remember, when Joseph makes this promise, everything is actually going pretty well for them. They have land. Pharaoh likes them. Joseph was the dude. And he makes this promise, and they must have been like, okay, why would we leave? This is great here. We have favor, we have land, we have all, like, why would we ever leave? This is what God clearly has for us. And Joseph, in his faith, because he has such singularity of focus, because he has God's promises, he can say, this ain't it. We're not from here. This is not our land. This is not what God has for us. It's not our identity. God swore to his people that he is preparing a place for them. And so Joseph says, you don't leave my bones in Egypt, the land of slavery. You take my bones to the land of promise. That's where I want to be buried, because God promised he will visit us there. He will visit us here. I want to be with my father, with my grandfather, the men of promise. That's where I want to be. Where are we without the promises of God? Where are we without his word and without believing his promises come from his very heart? So we can trust them. So Joseph, this man, he's possessed by the promise, which is amazing. So they carry the bones with them. They're leaving Egypt. And whatever, I don't know what the setup was like, but as part of the whole, there are hundreds of thousands of people, and somewhere in there are these guys carrying the bones. I don't know if it was labeled, if it was like, that's not the food. That's actually not it. That's the bones of Joseph. They're like, okay, we've got the bones of Joseph. Great. We'll not go to that one, but they're carrying the bones with them, right? The bones of his promise. And that's what you need. All of us have to be people where we carry the bones of God's faithfulness to us. The bones of God's promises, the things that he has done. It's a symbol. It's not just looking back to the past. What the bones represent is not just look what God has done in the past, though it does represent that. And when we forget that, we really go sideways. It's not just look back. It's also these bones, they're a signpost towards the world God is taking us to. They're looking forward. And so if you're looking back with the bones and saying, look at all that God's done, and you're looking forward to what he's going to do, then that reshapes your present. I'm going to be okay. Look at all that God has done. Look at where we're going. So I'm going to be okay. It's going to be okay. It's amazing. So then when the pruning comes and the suffering comes and the loss comes, though it may devastate us, it won't swallow us whole. Because we won't let, maybe for a little bit we will, but eventually we rise back up. We won't let our circumstances dictate God's character. We will let God's character dictate our circumstances because we carry the bones. Now, I've seen him move. I've seen him move the mountains. I believe he'll do it again. I believe it. Our God is not the God of the dead. He's the God of the living. You buried me in the land of promise. So they're carrying the bones with them. You got to carry the bones too. You have to carry the bones too. I say this sometimes to couples, after I marry them, they'll post something on Instagram sometime about something usually it's kind of funny, something one of the spouses, the husband or wife said that's kind of a joke, but it hit them kind of hard, It's like, can you believe they said this, And I'll always write back in a DM, I'll say, kind of joking way, but you know what I mean. I'm like, that's what the vows are for. That's what the promise, that's why you promised. And they're always like, ha, 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 laugh, all this stuff, yeah. Doesn't really matter what they say, but yeah, they do. They think it's funny. That's why you wear a ring. Every couple that I marry, I say, hey, if you want to write your own vows, that's fine, but we're doing the old vows. And here's why. My early times doing weddings, oftentimes I would let couples do their own vows, and what I began to pick up on was a lot of well-intentioned feelings and a lot of well-intentioned desire of how I'm going to love you or what I love about you. That is not a vow. Promising to watch some show with your husband is not a vow. Promising to love a person because you think they're funny is not a vow. What happens when they're not as funny? And what often happens in how we treat relationships and how we treat God or believe that God treats us is like, hey, what have you done for me lately? And the old vows, the old ways, the old paths are sickness and health, till death do us part. I love you because I said I would. That's why. Today I don't actually like you. But you know what? It's not about that. Because I'm gonna not let my feelings dictate how I feel about you. I promised I'm gonna carry those bones with me. Because I know, even if death separates us, I will see you again. We got to carry the bones. I know we all carry a lot of things in our hearts, don't we? Carry his promises. Here's the thing. God is not just making it up. He's not just making it up as we go along. He's like, hey, you know what, Ted, sorry, dude. We dropped the ball for like 2 years on your life. Just busy over here. Totally. How's it going? Oh, you went that way? You missed the sign. I know it was buried, but you missed it. Right? Or for the people of Israel, it's like, actually, maybe left turn, right turn. Sometimes God's not like that. He's already in the future. He knows every turn, he knows everything is planned, everything has a purpose. There is no plan B, it's all plan A. This is the way. This is the path. We have to be people that believe that. Joseph is able to believe that. He can say, God is taking us to a better place. We're in a redemption story. I know our God will visit us again, he promised. But the Israelites have more than bones, as great as they are. They've got more than the carrier of Joseph's bones. They have more than a symbol. They have God himself leading them. Number 3, his presence, the fire, the cloud. And they moved on from Succoth and encamped at Etham on the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light. That they may travel by day and by night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart before the people. Imagine you're on the edge of the wilderness. Now for us, it's so hard because we read back into the story and we know what's going to happen. For them, they're like, how truly unknown. Most of them are like, who even is this Moses guy? You think this church is big? Imagine, most of them have never even met the man. And he can't even speak. Got to have his brother do it. How can we trust this guy? He hasn't been here for 40 years. All right, and you get the murmuring, and you get the talking, and you get this. It's like, we got the bones of some guy, what's his name, Jimmy, Jimbo, what does that matter? We don't know, this gets 400 years ago, these bones. This is God's plan. Where are we going? Into that emotional state, into that, the reality of that moment is actually where God says, I'm going to give you even more. I'm going to give you my presence. You need more than bones. You need a cloud to cover you. You need a fire to lead you. And you need it to never depart from you so you can know you are my people and I am leading you to the place I prepared for you. You have to know that. His presence. It goes before us. It goes before us. It doesn't remove the danger, it walks with them through the danger, right? His presence doesn't remove all the anxiety, all the fear, all the pain, all the loss. It is a journey getting Egypt out of the people, but his presence is there. His presence is for all of those things, not to remove all of those things. One day he will remove all of those things when we're in his presence, but not yet. There's pruning to do. There is pruning to do, right? It says they're on the edge of the wilderness. I think that's where a lot of us live our lives. Because here's the deal. On the edge of the wilderness, you can kind of get by with his omnipresence. God's everywhere. I can go to church a couple times a month, maybe. I can get my Devo going. I can kind of, it's fine. I'm good. There's probably more for me, but, I got a lot of stuff going on. You can kind of handle your life on the edge of the wilderness. But when you cross over, you need more. When you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you need more than his omnipresence. You need his manifest presence. That is what you need. And here's the thing, I think we all know this, those of you who walk through the fire, when you walk through hell, when you walk through suffering, God in his grace spreads out a table filled with his presence for you to feast on. And when you're at your lowest, and when you're so scared, and when you're like, I was okay on the edge of the wilderness, and now I'm walking through the valley of the shadow of death, God turns up the volume and the size of his presence in your heart. That is how good he is. That's how kind he is. But for you and I, we get even more than that. Matthew 2, 13 through 15, Matthew says this. Now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph, different Joseph, okay, Jesus' dad, in a dream and said, rise, take the child and his mother and flee to where? To Egypt, of all the places to flee. And remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child and destroy him. And he rose and took the child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet, out of Egypt I've called my son. When they're reading this in the first century, they're thinking, wait a second, this is like the ultimate reframe. This is the ultimate wait, Egypt is your son. This is our story. Wait a second, is this also the story of Jesus? Out of Egypt I've called my son. Oh. Look, a cloud of fire is great. A pillar of fire is wonderful. A cloud is great. A pillar of fire is wonderful. What if that was all that we got? A lot of religions, that's more than they get. I mean, what if that was honestly it? It would be enough because that would be God's decree. And it'd be his presence, so it would be enough. If that was all God decided, hey, even now today, when you maybe it would be in here, I don't even know how it would work, but maybe it's outside, right? There's the cloud. There's as you go, there's the fire. We'd be like, okay, he's with us. He's there. But you know what clouds and fire can't do for you? They can't hold you. They can't weep with you. They can't laugh with you. They can't look you in the eye and see you. They can't bleed for you. They can't quite do that. See, God will visit his people again, but in a way that no one could have imagined, through a baby with flesh and blood. No one was more pruned than Jesus. He was fully cut down, wasn't he, on the tree of death? But it for us became a tree of life, and now it bears fruit. And you represent that, and this church represents that. No one walked through a greater wilderness than Jesus Christ. Not just 40 days in the desert, but his whole life. Compared to the heart of the Trinity, this whole earth experience was his wilderness journey that he walked for us. So when we walk through the wilderness journey, we know that he walks us and he holds us. We don't have to carry the bones of Joseph with us. We carry God's Spirit within us. And more importantly than that, his Spirit carries us. We don't have to look to the pillar of the cloud or the fire. We can look to the pillars of the cross and the empty tomb. That Christ lives in us. That Christ lives for us. That he who did not spare his own son, how will he not also with him graciously give us all things? All right, God, we have him. And at the end of the day, what all that really matters is he enough? Everything else you will lose. Everything else will be taken from you. He will not. Is he enough? All right, you can trust the pruning hands of Jesus. They still have holes in them. Because he lived, and because he died, and because he rose, and because he reigns, and even right now, he's interceding. And even right now, he's preparing a place for you. And one day he's returning. Do you know what? Look at me. Do you know what? Because of all of those things, it is going to be okay. It is what my dad would say all the time. It's really going to be okay. And it is. When you think 10,000 years from now, before the throne of his presence, we'll be okay. Why? Because we're going to the land of resurrection. We're not buried in Egypt. We're not. Do you know where Joseph is eventually buried? Actually in the promised land. Joshua, one of them, Joshua 24:32. As for the bones of Joseph, after all the war stopped, after they finally inherit the land years and years later, 40 years later, as for the bones of Joseph, which the people of Israel brought up from Egypt, they buried them at Shechem, which in Genesis 12 is where God first gave the promise by the oak tree to Abraham. Before any of it happened, before it was just in God's heart and God's dream to one man, he said, one day this whole land will be your possession and I will bury you here. So I imagine in my own mind that Joseph is buried right there by the oak tree where the promise came. It became an inheritance for the descendants of Joseph. They had the inheritance of an amazing piece of land. How amazing. How much greater is our inheritance through Jesus Christ? How much more do we have to look forward to? I was born in the land of slavery and death and sin, but I am buried in the land of forgiveness and freedom and promise. That's the gospel. That absolutely is the gospel. That's what's before us. Paul says this, I know he has Exodus in mind. In him you also, when you heard the word of truth, the gospel of your salvation, and believed in him, were sealed with the promised Holy Spirit, who is the guarantee of our inheritance until we acquire possession of it to the praise of his glory. I'm going to invite the worship team to come up as we close. As always, stay with me. I'm not quite done, but we're landing the plane, okay? Stay with me. Stay with me, okay? Here's the deal. What gives Joseph the strength in his final moments of life to say, when it makes no sense, take my bones with you? What gives Moses and Ruth and Job, you name them, the strength? When you read through Hebrews 11, every single person, what gives them the strength? The writer says it, they're looking toward the new heaven and new earth that God has prepared for them. That's where the strength comes from. You think of modern day Corrie ten Boom or Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Martin Luther King Jr., they saw the mountain. And so they could be struck down and yet they live. Because they know who had them. They know where they're going. So I want to ask you this morning, what about you? You're like, I'm not Moses. I'm more like the people grumbling. You don't have to be. You don't have to be. But I know everyone in this room either has, is now, or will walk through the fire. You'll be in the wilderness, and you'll sit there and you'll wonder, this cannot be the way. This cannot be what God has. I just want to encourage you. You do not turn back. Keep walking. You keep walking. And when you stumble and when you fall and when you feel like I'm actually going backwards, maybe you are for a bit, he who began a good work in you, he will complete it. He will do the work. He has prepared a place for you. He's preparing a place for you right now. Do not lose hope, right? You can say, bury me in Shechem. The next thing I will see is God's face. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. Perplexed, indeed, but not driven to despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. Always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifest in our bodies. For we who live are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in us, but life in you. Since we have the same spirit of faith, according to what has been written, I believed and so I spoke, we also believe, and so we also speak, knowing that he who raised the Lord Jesus will raise us also with Jesus and bring us with you into his presence. For it is all for your sake, so that as grace extends to more and more people, it may increase with thanksgiving to the glory of God. So we do not lose heart. Actually, let's all say it together. Okay, let's all say it together. So we do not lose heart, though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light, momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, as we look not to things that are seen, but the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. Father, would you just meet us here? In Christ's name, amen.